welcome to GryphonArt. Today I'm going to be temporarily deviating away from my A5 milk carton series of tutorials so that I can show you how to make this little drop-sided gift box which I recently created with somebody very specific in mind. This is a really sturdy little box because, as you'll see in a minute, the base is all layered even without the addition of this little center tray, and with that tray you then end up with a very strong base. So what that means is that you can actually put something quite heavy in this box without having any fears whatsoever that it's going to drop out of the bottom at any point. Now, just to give you some idea of volume, this box will take 3 of these bars of soap stood on end, and you can then still put your lid on over the top there. Okay, right, so I'm going to make a start on the base of this box. So it's this section here with the drop sides, and if you're using A4 card then you're going to need 2 pieces of this that excludes these embellishments, so just for the base itself. Now you are going to need to trim your A4 card down to 11.5 inches by 6.5 inches. We're going to be making the base out of this green card, and I've just sat it on a piece of black standard A4 card so you can see roughly how much you're trimming away. But essentially you're looking for 11.5 inches by 6.5 inches, and you're going to need 2 pieces of card the same size. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to place our card on our scoring board in portrait mode, so the longer section down the left hand side, and we're going to be scoring on the wrong side of our card. The first score line we're going to make is at 3 7/8 of an inch, so just down from our 4. And then we're going to turn that piece of card anti-clockwise, and we're going to score at 3 7/8 of an inch again, and then at 7 5/8 of an inch. Now you're going to need 2 pieces of card scored in exactly the same way, and I've actually already done that earlier to save time, and that's all the scoring that we need to do for the base with our scoring board, so we can now temporarily put that to one side. So the next thing that we're just going to do very quickly is to fold and crease all of our score lines, just taking care as we do so that the fold lines line up nicely with our score lines, and that way you're going to be fairly confident that you'll get a nice square box. I'll just do that quickly to this one so that you can see what I'm doing if you're new to gift box making, and then I'll do the other one off camera and come back to you at that stage. So the next thing that we want to do is to form a grid of 9 cells by overlapping the narrow sections of our card so that they're completely overlapping to form a double layer there, and that's in such a way that these large squares are positioned in the corners. Now I have already placed double-sided tape on one section of my scored card, and this is actually on the right side of the card. Now the reason for that is, it doesn't really matter which side you do, but the reason I do it is because when you folded that card it creates this nice little ridge, and I find that enables you to use it almost as a break when you're lining up this second piece of card on the top. I find it certainly helps with positioning, so that's the reason for that. Now I am going to be using a combination of PVA glue as well as my double-sided tape, which if you've been watching my videos you will already know that I have a tendency to do that. It's really because the brand of double-sided tape that I use doesn't really have the long-term strength. It doesn't bond in quite the same way as my PVA glue does. But conversely, if I was to use all PVA glue on this large amount of card, it would soak into the card and make it curl, and you know, I try and avoid that really. So the other thing is, because of the strength of the PVA, I do particularly like to get it into these edge sections so that there's no peeling away of this particular project. So I am careful of going too far here though, because I'm not quite sure how much that's going to overlap with the other piece of card. So I'll show you how I compensate for that in a minute. I'll just flatten all those out. Right. Now, just to compensate for that other piece, again, this is the right side of my card. You can see by the direction of the bend. I'm just going to flip that over, and along this edge put another bead of glue. And that will just, I hope you can see that all right. That will just overlap and make sure that I have got full adhesion on that central section. So just make sure that goes up to that edge. Set that aside. So having done that, I can now remove the backing tape from my double-sided tape, which is often easier said than done, but there. And now, laying that down, I can take this other piece where I've got the glue on the wrong side and just position that against that ridge really, so that I can line everything up before applying some pressure, so that that double-sided tape grabs and holds the position of that card. So there we go, that's nicely overlapping. Now, because I've used PVA glue, that I really do want that to dry off before I go any further with that project. So I'm going to give that time to go off. If you've just used heavy duty double-sided tape, then you can go straight on to the next section of the project. But if you've used a moist glue, I would recommend that you just let it dry off. So I'll come back to you when that's had a chance to do that. Right, so I've had a nice cup of coffee, and I know now that that's given this glue enough time to go off, and I can happily proceed. So the next thing that we need to do is to put some diagonal score lines into these corner squares, which will allow the sides of our box to come together when we need to put the lid on, and conversely allow the sides to drop when the lid is removed. So I have already put a couple of those in place, and I'm just going to put the last couple in place on camera. So you are working from, if you use the center rectangle, you're working from the corner of that to the outside corner of your card. So we'll just make sure that's lining up. And you pop in a reasonable score line. You're not, especially if you're using a self-heal mat as I am, so that it makes folding easier. And by the way, this is the outside of the box as well. So from the corner of the central rectangle to the outside corner of your square. With those in place, we should now be able to encourage that fold along that line. I don't know whether you can see. So we're just encouraging it. You can put your thumbs either side of it if it's not going in very easily. And if you're really struggling with this, you might want to rescore your lines because perhaps you've just been a bit gentle when you've done the scoring. And then just use a bone folder to really make sure that that fold goes in place. And you can either score on the inside or the outside of your box, it doesn't matter. The folds will go either way. All right, so I'll do one more. I'm not going to do them all on camera, but I'll do one more. So we're just folding that in, and from, if you're doing it on the inside, you can see how the sides of your box come together as that fold takes shape. And then you've got the triangular shape on the inside of your box in this instance, and we're just going to use the bone folder to crease that firmly. Right, so you can see how that's starting to allow our box to work. Now the next thing that we're going to do, because that's quite deep, you know, that fold is actually beyond the side of the box on this side, we are going to cut it back. So you could score a line and then cut along it, or use a scalpel blade and a ruler. What I'm going to do is use my trimmer, which is a viscose trimmer. So I'm just going to put that where you can see it. And what I do is I just place that into my trimmer so that I can get the edge of that fold line on there, and similarly the edge of that fold line there. Once I know that they're positioned, I can just cut through. And this is what you're ending up with. So it's just half that rectangle in effect. That perhaps makes it a little bit more clear. Now that might seem a bit wasteful because that's now, that piece of card has now got a fold line through it, but actually I find it so much easier to get this central point just by using the outside edge of your square. If that was removed first, you've then got to try and measure and find out where that's got to be scored to, and that's going to take a bit of time. It's up to you if you choose to go down that route, but the method I choose is to score, fold, and then cut. So I'm going to do the other 4 off camera to save time, and then I'll come back to you at that point. So you should now have a piece of card that's basically a rectangle with the corners cut out, and you should be able to very easily draw the sides together, and that is essentially your box base. Now this particular design does have embellished panels, and that's what we're going to be tackling next. Now first of all, the panel sizes, we've got 4 of them here, will be provided for you in a table at the end of this video so that you can screen dump it if you want. And that will be along with all the card sizes that you need for this project. Now this is fairly straightforward, so I'm not going to be spending a lot of time on this. I'm just going to do one on camera and then I'll do the rest off camera. I'm going to be using my normal combination of double-sided tape and PVA glue, and I've already put the double-sided tape in place for that. So this is one of the little end panels, and I'm just going to glue it in place. And the only real thing to be aware of is that you want to get these at the top edge flush. Now the reason for this, I just want to make you aware of this, the reason is because if it's not flush, this is the edge where your lid is going on and off, and it could easily catch onto any card that's sticking proud, and that could make your box end up looking a bit tatty and perhaps even have a peeling action on this top edge. So when you come to put these on, as I say, it's fairly straightforward. Just make sure that wherever else it's fitting, it is flush on that top edge to save damage over time. So let's quickly crack on. I'm just going to put some glue around the edges because I want those edges to stick really well. And this is really where I feel the PVA comes into its own. It will benefit from a little extra glue in the center here, but it's the edges I'm most concerned with. So I'll just get that. Make sure they have a good coat of glue right to that edge. You know, if you're using another method, it's just something to bear in mind. You know, you'll have your own choices of adhesion that you're comfortable with. So I'm not suggesting that PVA is the only option at all. So I can now just get rid of the backing off my double-sided tape. Nearly there. Fab. Right, so I'm going to keep that flat and line everything up, but just make sure that that top edge is flush before letting the rest set in place. So it's straightforward, really straightforward. So it's just that top edge that you need to be giving some consideration to. So I'm going to go ahead now and put the rest of those panels on, and as I say, the panel sizes will be available for you at the end of the video, and I'll come back to you at that point. So now that those panels have all been adhered to the main box, you probably can get a feel for how sturdy this little box is, particularly these end panels. Now, essentially, in its basic form, that is the base of your box finished. It just requires a lid. And so that's what we're going to tackle next. So the lid of our box requires one piece of A4 if you're using A4 card, and that's going to be trimmed back. So it will measure 8 inches by 9 1/8 of an inch. So you've got an idea of what you're trimming off your A4 card there. Okay. Now we're going to place that card onto our scoring board, effectively in portrait mode. So you want to just make sure that the card across the top doesn't extend beyond the 8-inch mark, and as long as you do that, you're fine for this first set of score lines. So the first point that we're going to score at is at 1 1/4 inches. We then score at 2 5/8 of an inch. Then we score at 5 3/8 of an inch. And at 6 3/4 inches. We can now turn our card anti-clockwise, and we're now going to score again at 1 1/4 inches. At 2 5/8 of an inch. At 6 1/2 inches. And at 7 7/8 of an inch. At this point we finished with our scoring board again for the time being, so we can put that out of the way. So the next thing that we need to do is just fold and crease along all of those score lines, and as there's quite a few of them, I'm going to do that off camera and come back to you when I've finished. Right, so I have now folded and creased all of those score lines that we just made, and you'll see that I've also taken away some of the excess card here from 3 of the corners just to save time. There's no point me doing them all on camera. and I've just left one to show you what we're going to be doing here, and you repeat this for all of the corners. So we're going to, if I just show you that the actual box design involves folding down a flap, and then these sections will fold in, and you'll see that. So what we're going to be doing is retaining this bit of the flap, and this bit we don't need. Now we're going to cut away any trace of the fold line as well, and I'll explain why. I'll show you that in a minute. So we cut that section away, including the fold line. We're retaining this long flap, so we cut these little squares to, in this case, to the left of it, including the fold line. And now we can get rid of this corner and along the edge, and again it's including the fold line. Get rid of that. So we want to keep this little corner because that's our joining flap, which you'll see later. So we'll just cut this excess piece off that we don't need, including the fold line. So that means that all these little corners that you have left don't have any sign of a fold along their edges. You can see that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is just cut in to create these little flaps so that we can join our box together. So in this case, you're cutting down the middle of the fold line. And I haven't done any of these, so I will just quickly do them all. So just down the middle of the fold line. And it doesn't really matter whether you're cutting this one or this one, as long as once you've made the decision, do the opposite one. So I've cut into this one, so I now need to do the opposite one. So cutting into that one, down the center of the fold line, last one. So what that's leaving you is a shape like that. Okay, now the reason that we cut those folds away, and I've already put some double-sided tape here to save time, is that this, let's work with the longer one, it's probably easier. This is going to fold down and be glued there. Now if we'd got too much of that fold line in place, these would not readily turn up. So, and what you'd end up doing is having to cut angles down here. And actually you can do that if you wish, that's absolutely fine. I try and keep as much of my card in place just for strength really. But you know, if you prefer to just angle these ends so that they don't interfere with the folding of the edges of your box, that's fine. But if you want to just take that quick route, which is cutting away the fold line, that will fold in nicely, and you shouldn't have any problems. Right, so we're now ready to assemble our boxes, and these flaps will go against here. So the first thing I'm going to do is to stick down these end sections. So, and I'm going to work in pairs. So I think I'll try and just quickly do one side on camera, and then, you know, I'll do the rest off camera as I normally do. So just get as much glue on there in the normal way. Remove the backing tape and then just glue that down onto there. In fact, I think I will, it'll be clearer, I think, if I do it both on camera. So I'll try and be quick. Trouble is, they say more haste, less speed, don't they? So that's our two longer lengths. Now, before we do these little ones, we're going to glue these edges in, and I work with two at a time, opposing ends. So let's just on the outside to start with, which I haven't done, I'll just quickly put some double-sided tape. Just a little bit. Now I do work in pairs with this. As I say, the first one is not critical, but you'll see when I come to the second set why it's advisable really to work in pairs with these. I'll just get that glue. Ready to go. Get rid of that tape. And then you can just line these up. And once that's lined up, you can just use a bone folder to just make sure that's firmly in place. Do the same this end. Line that up nice and squarely. Now I won't do the next one on camera just to save time, but I don't know whether you can see, if you've got that one glued in place, it's quite tight to try and get this one in. So that's just to demonstrate why it's better to work with these in pairs, and make sure that before you stick this one up, this flap is also on the inside, and you'll be fine. Then once you've done that, all you need to do is glue those ones down as well. So I'm going to do that remaining little bit off camera, and then I can come back to you at that point. So all the sides have been stuck down now, and that's essentially our basic lid. So if we take our base and put all the sides together, lids can be a bit stiff actually when you start out, and just pop that in place, and there we have our lid. So the only thing remaining other than the embellishments is the internal tray. Now I am going to crack on and sort that out with you, because it's essentially just a small lid. If I can show you in this one, I'm hoping that you can see, it's just a small lid. So you're just going to repeat the process that you've just gone through, but with a smaller piece of card and smaller score lines. So I'll go through that with you now, so that you've got those score lines, and I'll leave you to make up the tray in the same way that you did the lid. So the first thing that we're going to be needing is a piece of card, and again this is being cut from a piece of A4. It's too big unfortunately for A5, so the dimensions on that piece are 7 3/8 of an inch by 6 1/4 inches, and as I said, I will include these dimensions for you at the end of the video. So what we're going to do is we're going to have that essentially in landscape mode to start with, and we're going to be scoring at 7/8 of an inch, at 1 7/8 of an inch, at 5 1/2 inches, and at 6 1/2 inches. We can then turn that anti-clockwise, and we're back again to 7/8 of an inch, (1 7/8 of an inch), 4 3/8 of an inch, and 5 3/8 of an inch. So you can see that that's just a smaller version of what you scored for your lid. So you're just going to go through the same process as you did for the lid. You'll fold and crease all these lines, cut out these 3 corner squares on each corner, and then glue your sides down. So I don't think I really need to go through that with you again, because you're just reproducing a small lid. So you can go back and refer to that if you need to. So I will do that part of this project off camera to save your time, and then I'll come back to you at the point that I'm ready to fit that to the box. Right, so that's now my tray put together, and before I go on, I just wanted to show you essentially that's my lid and that's my tray. It's just essentially repeating the same process for the lid as you did for the tray as you did for the lid, but you're just ending up with something that's got slightly different dimensions, that's all. Okay, so we're now ready to put our tray, position it into the center of our box, and I've already put double-sided tape on the back, as you can see, and you've probably by now realized that that is the method that I use. So I'm going to put some glue on here because I do want these edges to stick down well. So I'm more concerned again with the edges, although I'll put a little bit in the center there as well. So I just want to spread that onto the edge of that base. And then I can just take the backing tape off this double-sided tape as well. And then it's just a question of lining this up essentially as possible. Now there is a little bit of space either side here because that's where the folds go into, so it's a reasonably close fit end to end, but you've got space either side. You can just make sure that there's free play in the fold. There will be on the sides, so that's fine. So once I'm happy with the positioning of that, then I can use my bone folder just to get those edges down and just across the base without marking the base too much. So now I do like that glue to go off, because if I was to put the lid on now, if there's any trace of glue on those edges, it's going to stick. So I'm going to give that glue time to go off, and then I'll come back to you at that point and we can talk about embellishments. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the embellishments that we use for our box. Now on the inside, these comprise mainly of die cuts, and I will give you all the details for these die cuts in the description area for this video. So first of all, there's a Creative Expressions Just For You die cut, which is from the Heart collection. And these are thin dies, and this one comes with these, it's one main die, but you get an extra little 5 little hearts. And if I just show you here, I've actually cut the die in a white, but I've cut the little hearts separately in gold. So that's one of the things we'll be dealing with. So that's that one. I've also used a Spellbinders Shapeabilities Delights, and that's Vines of Passion for this heart shape here. So again, I'll put that in the description section. And finally, I've used another Delight, which is the Spellbinders Shapeabilities die cutter, and this one's called Sprigs, and it's just this little one here that I've used. So those are the die cutters. Now I have actually applied most of those dies to my box already because they're quite fiddly, and actually I only really need to show you how to apply one and you'll get the gist of things. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this last one, which is the Just For You sentiment. Now I'm sure there's all sorts of different ways and different approaches that people take when it comes to sticking die cuts down, but I'm just going to show you the method that I use for these fiddly ones. It has evolved slightly since I first started, but essentially I use PVA glue and I just use the needle point of the applicator to try and get the glue on all these little twiddly bits, and I'm not really worried if I'm putting out more glue than I need. In fact, I probably have to do that to ensure that I'm getting a good coverage. So I'm just working my way around all those areas. Particularly those little twiddly bits, because you know, if they're loose they can easily get snagged and then they'll get torn and the appearance of your box will be diminished. So we try and avoid that if we can. And I'm not really worried about this section where I'm holding on to the die cut, because I can come back to that at the end, as you'll see. Just get that little heart there. Right, so I'm hoping that you can see there is actually quite a lot of glue on there, and I would soon identify any sections that don't have glue because they would be dull. So I'm now just going to, you can see how much glue there is there. I'm just going to dab and sort of drag that around to make sure that the edges are covered and all these little fine filigree bits are covered in glue. Just moving it all around. And then when I'm happy that that glue has got good coverage, I can just move away from where I've been holding it and beg, borrow and steal from other areas and just make sure that's also got a good coverage of glue. Now at this point I want to get rid of the excess, so I'll just move that slightly for a minute. All I'm going to do is use, in this case, a piece of paper kitchen towel, and I don't want to put the whole lot down, but putting half down at a time onto that absorbent tissue, that's going to take away any of that excess glue which would otherwise ooze and perhaps look unsightly. And you can just check the back to see whether there's any areas where there still needs to be more glue taken up, because that's one of the things with PVA, it doesn't dry that quickly, so you've got time to just reduce it to a layer of stickiness before applying it where you need to. So I'm move that back where you can see it. So I'm now in a position, just a bit there, where I can line this up. And I am just using my eye on this occasion. If you've been watching my videos, you will know that I sometimes produce templates to help me with positioning, but being a bit lazy today, so I figured that it can be more or less right, will be fine. So then once that's in position and you're happy with it, you really do just need to make sure you press all the areas down. And it's surprising, even if you've taken most of the glue off the back there, it has enough adhesion left to make sure it sticks down. Okay, now the only final little bit to do on the inside of the box is to apply these little heart shapes to the embellishment that I cut out additionally. So I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of glue on there. They don't need much. I probably would be better off using a pair of tweezers or something with something this small, but hey ho, here we go. There we are, that's the first one. It just lifts that embellishment a bit, I think. So just put that down where that heart shape is. Oops. There we go, one more. There we are. So that's all the embellishments finished on the inside of the box. So I can now have a look at the lid, and I've already put, we have a look at the original. If I've already put this embellishment on the lid, which is simply because it's applied in the very same way as I've just shown you. So that's fine, that's the lid sorted. But there is just that little cold porcelain flower to sort out. So and the ribbon. So I'm just going to close this up because I do prefer to put the ribbon around the box lid when the box lid is in situ. So we'll put our lid on first of all. Now let's have a look at this one. What we're going to do is just place a bit of gross grain ribbon. In this case it's 6mm of gross grain ribbon with a little bow embellishment at the front of the box. That's to indicate that's the way you want people to open the box, because that's where this just for you sentiment will be in the right way up. It's not going to be upside down as it would be if they open the box from the other end. So that indicates the front of the box. So what I've done is I've taken a length of 14 inches long of gross grain ribbon, and I've applied double-sided tape to the back of that ribbon because that's actually my preferred form of adhesion for fabric. You know, if you've got another form of glue that you prefer, then you know, by all means go with that. So it's a 14-inch length. I've got the front of the box in front of me, and again I'm just going to use my eye in this case. I know this ribbon is going to overlap slightly, so I want it to be slightly beyond the center of this box, so that'll be about right. And then once that's in position, I'll just take a straight line to the edge of the lid and I can stick that down. And I'm just going to work my way around the box in that fashion. So. The tape can come away altogether. So that's my ribbon around the box. The next thing I need to do is just apply this little bow that I made up earlier in the same ribbon, and that will get applied to the front. And I'm going to be using some Yoo-Hoo all-purpose adhesive for that. So I'll just get a little bit of that on the end of a cocktail stick. I learned the hard way that it's not always easy to control a tube of Yoo-Hoo, but you can sort of get a measure of control with a cocktail stick. So there we go. So I'm just going to put a reasonable amount of yoo-hoo on the back of that knot, really. I also want to get a little bit on this piece of ribbon, because I'll use that then to keep the tails of the ribbon where I want them to be. So there we go, that works for that. And I'm now just going to again use my eye to make sure that I have roughly a centralized position, according to my eyesight anyway. And then I'll use a bone folder. If I hold those tails roughly where I want them to be, I can then use the bone folder just to apply some pressure either side of those tails and on the knot, so that we get the tails in place. Now also I could, if I wanted to on this one, because it's kinked a little, I could put a bit of yoo-hoo behind there. In fact, I think I will do that. Just tiny bit. I'm gonna put that will just make sure that that will maintain the position where I want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry out a bit, and whilst I do that, I'm going to do this one final embellishment, which is to apply a little cold porcelain flower about there on my embellishment. And I return to my PVA glue for that, because I make these cold porcelain flowers and I make my own cold porcelain, so I know that it has a very high content of PVA glue, and therefore it's reasonable to suggest that the two PVA is going to bond well to cold porcelain. Now, if you haven't got cold porcelain flowers, you can use buttons in this case, or some other embellishment. If you particularly want to use cold porcelain flowers and you're not sure how to make them, I do have a tutorial on my channel that demonstrates how you make these. So you know, by all means have a look at that if that's of interest to you. So I think that's ready to go. Just probably better leave that for a second or two. Well, I'm going to take a risk. That may still be a bit damp behind there, but I'm hoping that it's taken enough of a hold to allow me to trim this ribbon off. And what I do here with these boxes is I just line my scissors up with the bottom of the box and take off any excess, so it just reaches the end of the box lid in a way. And I do the same this side as well. So there we are, that's our ribbon trimmed off, and actually that's our job side box finished. Now I probably won't take the lid off that because that flower's not going to be quite dry, but you've seen the inside of this one and how that works. And as always, I've got a number of different colorways to show you, because they do often look quite different in different colorways. So we've got the green one that we've made today, and the purple one that I've been using throughout this tutorial. We've also got two varieties of blue. It's the same card but with a different contrast on the sides and a slightly different cold porcelain flower on the top, and they're the same on the inside. And then finally, one of my favorites actually is this ginger and brown one. So there's a few options open to you. So that's basically, let's go back to our first one, see if we can dare to take the lid off. So that's basically our drop side box I hope that you've enjoyed that tutorial. Now I am going to be making a lot of boxes and embellishments over the next year, so if you are really into your gift boxes, don't forget to subscribe to the GryphonArt channel if you're interested in knowing when the new tutorials become available. In the meantime, thank you very much for your time. It is appreciated.